can lift the stone in his path, or he can curse the stone. The choice is his. But remember, that stone is not the enemy, but the teacher. Babaji. I know you are reading this article because a question has resounded in your heart. Why, if God is all-powerful and loving, does he create human suffering? An eternal question throughout human history. From ancient Indian sages to today's practitioners, from enlightened people to souls struggling in the midst of everyday life, everyone has faced this question. Today, I would like to share with you a perspective, not from theory, not from books, but from the immortal teachings of Babaji, from ancient epics, from cosmic wisdom, where suffering and happiness, darkness and light are all part of divine unity. Let's dive into this story together. The story of a disciple. Once, a disciple came to Babaji with a face full of suffering. Teacher, why do people suffer misfortune? Why are some people born rich and happy, while others are drowning in suffering? If God is omnipotent, why didn't he create a world free of pain? Babaji looked at him, smiled, and then asked softly, "Have you ever seen the flames burning?" The disciple nodded. "If you touch the fire, what will you feel?" "It's going to burn me, Master." "But if you know how to use fire, it can cook food, illuminate the darkness, and warm up in the cold night, right?" The disciple nodded again. Suffering is like that fire. When you don't understand it, it will burn you. But when you know how to use it, suffering becomes the greatest teacher God has sent you. Suffering is a teacher, not an enemy. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna said to Arjuna, "Nothing happens beyond the will of the universe." Even in suffering, there is a profound meaning that my mind cannot see right away. Imagine if this life was without challenges, without difficulties, would we really grow up? If we don't have disease, do we know how to appreciate health? Without the loss, would we have learned the value of love? Babaji once said, "People often ask God to remove suffering, but do not realize that suffering is their means to liberation." There is an ancient Indian story that says, a blacksmith wants to forge a perfect sword. He put the iron rod in the fire, beat it repeatedly with a hammer, and then dipped it in cold water again. The iron bar cracked and cracked, as if crying in pain. But after hundreds of forgings, it finally became a sharp, indestructible sword. The human soul is the same. Every challenge we go through is to refine ourselves into a more complete version of ourselves. The law of cause and effect and freedom of choice. One of the fundamental principles of Indian philosophy is the law of cause and effect, karma. Babaji says, "No suffering is meaningless, no happiness is random. Everything is the result of past choices." I remember once a woman came to Babaji and asked, "Teacher, why do you suffer poverty and sickness while the wicked live happily?" Babaji smiled. "Look at a farmer. When he sows the seeds of rice, he harvests the rice. When he sows thorns, he will receive thorns. Cause and effect are the same. Sometimes the seeds that are sown do not ripen immediately, but when the time is right, they will bloom. That is, suffering is not a punishment, but the result of past actions, be it this life or previous lives. Overcoming suffering, the path to awakening. If suffering is an inevitable part of life, then how can we not be weighed down by it? Babaji teaches that. Observe instead of react. When suffering comes, don't resist it. Observe and learn from it. Letting go of attachment, suffering comes largely from clinging to what can't be changed. Let go. Meditation and mindfulness. When you meditate, you realize that pain is only a small part of the vast universe. Babaji says, "My heart is like the surface of a lake. If you let the rocks fall, the water will ripple. But if you keep it still, you'll see the sky within yourself. Open your heart and find peace again." Today, I would like to send you a message. Suffering is not your enemy. Embrace it as a teacher. God does not create suffering to punish you, but to help you evolve. Live with gratitude, even with challenges. Babaji said, "When you stop asking, 'Why are you suffering?' and start asking, 'What can you learn from it?' that's when you enter the path of enlightenment." Suffering is a journey of enlightenment. We have come to understand that suffering is not a punishment from the Almighty, but a part of spiritual development. How can we go through these sufferings without being drowned in darkness? Babaji says, "Enlightenment does not come from comfort, but from courage in the face of suffering." When people accept suffering as part of the journey, they cease to be victims, but become enlightened. I remembered the story of a disciple who came to Babaji and asked, "Teacher, I have spent many years meditating, living in poverty and serving, but I still face many challenges. Why are you still suffering?" Babaji looked deeply into his eyes and replied, "Do you see that river? When the water flows through the rocks, does it stop?" The disciple shook his head. "That's right. It keeps flowing. But it is these stones that make the water clearer and purer. If there is no challenge, my soul will forever be like stagnant water, never pure." When you understand this, you will no longer suffer because of suffering. From there, the disciple no longer blames fate but learns to see suffering as a lesson. Look at suffering from a higher perspective. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna said to Arjuna in the middle of the Kurukshetra battlefield, "What is happening is not a coincidence, Arjuna. See the hand of the Almighty in everything. When you are no longer attached to the result, you will find peace." This teaching reminds us that suffering only exists when we cling to what we want. When we learn to let go and trust the flow of the universe, suffering is no longer a shackle, but a door to enlightenment. Suffering, a bridge to liberation. There is an old story in the Upanishads about a young, powerful king who was always haunted by the fear of losing everything. He went to a sage and asked, "Sir, why do you have to endure this fear? I have it all, kingdoms, riches, and submissives. But in my mind, there is always insecurity." The sage looked at him with compassionate eyes and said, "Go into the forest alone for 7 days. Live without carrying anything. When I come back, I will answer you." The king reluctantly complied. 7 days later, he returned, his clothes tattered, his body emaciated, but his eyes shining. "What have you learned?" the sage asked. The king knelt down and replied, "Sir, I have learned that when there is nothing to lose, I am no longer afraid. When I accept everything that happens, I feel free." The sage smiled. Yes, suffering does not come from circumstances, but from clinging. When you stop clinging, you will no longer suffer. Babaji talks about the meaning of suffering. Babaji once taught, "The noblest souls are those who have gone through the ordeal without losing their inner light." Remember, the brightest jade is the one that has been honed the most. Once, a disciple came to him and complained, "Teacher, I've been meditating for years, but I'm still being challenged. Why aren't you blessed with an easy life?" Babaji looked at him with compassion and replied, "Do you know the difference between iron and gold? Both are metals, but gold has withstood fire to become precious. Suffering is the fire that purifies your soul. Do you want to become iron or become gold?" The disciple shed tears and understood the lesson, transforming suffering into light. An important thing that Babaji always reminds is that not everyone learns from suffering. Some people let suffering turn them into victims, while others use it to awaken. So how can we transform suffering into light? 1. Accept instead of resist. When a person resists suffering, it becomes a burden. But when they accept it with understanding, it becomes an ascending ladder. As Babaji once said, "What you resist will continue to exist. What you accept will transform." 2. See suffering as a teacher. If the universe does not send us challenges, we will never mature. Suffering is a strict teacher, but also the most patient teacher. Babaji taught, "A kite flies higher when the wind is stronger. A more enlightened soul when the challenge is greater." 3. Seek inner silence. When we are still, we can hear the voice of truth. Look at the Buddha. He found the way to liberation not by running away from suffering, but by going into deep inner silence. Babaji also said, "I can't find peace outside. It only exists in my heart." Silence, the key to overcoming suffering. Once, a disciple came to Babaji and said, "Teacher, I have tried to accept all the challenges, but I still feel heavy. Sometimes I wonder if I'm on the right track." Babaji pointed to the lake in front of them and said, "Look down at this lake. If you disturb him, can you see the bottom?" The disciple shook his head. "No, Master, the water surface is disturbed." Babaji smiled. "But what if you sit still and wait?" The disciple understood. When the water is still, it becomes transparent. In the same way, when people's minds are still, the truth will be revealed. Babaji continued, "Most people try to run away from suffering by looking for external pleasures. But if you sit still and observe, you will see that suffering does not exist as an independent entity. It's just a fleeting wave in the ocean of mind. How can the mind become still? The journey out of suffering is not a war, but a process of letting go and becoming quiet. Here are 3 methods Babaji has taught to achieve inner stillness. 1. Observe all emotions without judgment. Babaji teaches that whenever we experience suffering, sit down and observe it as an outsider. Look at your child's pain without labeling it as good or bad. When you merely observe, it will dissipate on its own. It's like when a cloud passes through the sky, it comes, then it goes. If you don't cling to it, it won't be able to dominate you. 2. Breathe deeply and relax completely. The breath is the bridge between the body and the mind. When your child feels stressed, focus on breathing and relax each cell in your body. Babaji says, "A disturbed mind is a sign of a rush of breath." When you slow down your breathing, you slow down your thoughts. Just sit still, inhale slowly, and exhale very gently. After a while, you will feel a deep peace. 3. Let go of all expectations. Most of people's pain comes from wanting things to go their way. When things don't go as expected, they feel frustrated and miserable. Babaji taught, accept everything as it is. When you stop wishing, you'll find that you've always had everything you need. Remember, suffering only exists when you resist reality. When you accept, you will find peace. Meditation transforms suffering into light. Try practicing the following meditation when your child is feeling distressed or stuck. Sit down in a quiet place and close your eyes. Take a deep breath, imagining that you are bringing a gentle light into your body. Exhale gently, imagining that all pain, stress, and anxiety are dissipating. Observe your child's emotions, but don't try to change them. Let them come and go like clouds drifting in the sky. Continue to breathe deeply and let go, feeling your body and mind become lighter. When you practice this meditation regularly, you will realize that no suffering is permanent. Everything changes, but the light inside me is always there. Only when you are silent can you hear the truth. Babaji teaches that. I can't hear the voice of my soul when I'm busy following the outside world. Only when you stop can you really listen. Suffering is not the enemy. He is just a teacher, helping me learn the most important lesson. You are the light I am seeking. If you are going through a challenge, remember that it is only a small part of your soul's vast journey. Let's stop. Breathe. Observe. Peace is not far away. It's always right here, right now. Namaste.